So you know Elf, the movie about a man-child terrorizing regular society. He vandalizes and disrupts businesses and destroys a bunch of kids in a snowball fight. Yeah, I think we all know that Buddy isn't right in the head. This is a result of a lack of a father figure in his life, and even being raised by Santa. I imagine Santa is like a landlord, you know, there for a week out of the year to deal with business, and then probably chilling in dubious parties like a Wall Street millionaire. Buddy from Elf is a perfect example of Peter Pan syndrome. Now, this isn't an actual psychological ailment. It's not a part of your diagnosis with ADHD and depression. No, you just need to lock the f in. Peter Pan syndrome is the literary dictation of a character who acts very young compared to their age. Think about the movie Step Brothers, Vash Stampede from the original Trigun, and perhaps even Papyrus from Undertale. To be frank, I think many of us would like to revisit that imaginative period of our childhoods. However, my country says that we shouldn't support programs that help poor people like universal healthcare, which, you know, certainly dampens my mood. Many of these examples I've mentioned usually already have some hyper-fantastical facets about their lives and world. But I think a very good example of a grounded scenario with Peter Pan syndrome, real to the point of hurting physically, is Night in the Woods. This game may be filled with humanoid animals, which may raise questions about where I am on the furry spectrum, but this is more so an afterthought. What you believe to be a comfy game filled with human interactions turns into a commentary on societal norms, expectations, mental health, and is filled with scenarios that test your humanity. I'm not much for thinking too hard, but I almost burst a blood vessel from how hard I was straining my peanut-sized brain. I want to talk about Night in the Woods as a game. Let's explore the commentary it has on neurodivergence, whether it's an aversive nature to growing up in this cruel world, old habits that are too hard to kick, or an atypical apathy that prevents us from moving on. We have to come to terms with the fact that some of these aspects exist either in our belief or despite our arrogance. Let's learn a little bit about how Night in the Woods portrays neurodivergence in a humanizing way. As some of you may know, Night in the Woods is a coming-of-age story. For those of you who are too afraid to touch this game due to the competitive multiplayer game Brain Rot Pandemic, then let me drop some of the plot. You are May, a college student visiting her hometown. During your time here, you revisit many of the old places you used to frequent, and learn about new changes in one of the only places you've known all your life. An obvious story device in this game is nostalgia, and it's used in both surface level exposition and in-depth analysis. There's comments from May about old restaurants being closed and how good the pasta there was. I remember when the Denny's near me closed down, I was practically heartbroken. There's memories there of my younger self with my family enjoying a grand slam, and that was before I knew about the legendary 3 a.m. tweaked out breakfast for dinner in high school. You know, I went to a bougie school, so we'd go out to Korean barbecue, but every once in a while they could be normal and go to a diner. I could relate to May and her country vibe. When I was growing up, it was acceptable to order Little Caesars. Just like May in her town, now other major chains have swooped in to steal all the business available in a place where a sinkhole could devour your house. Of course, not all nostalgia is exactly fond memories. We all have those embarrassing stories that we don't want to remember. Maybe it was pissing your pants in school because you were too scared to ask to go to the bathroom. Could have been that time when you had your first kiss and you clinked teeth. Anything more than that, and you might need therapy for your trauma. I know for sure that May from Night in the Woods feels this way. Growing up is full of moments we fancy and others we despise. A large theme in Night in the Woods is about growing up. I've already said it, but May is a prime example of Peter Pan syndrome. Despite being 20 years old, May can act quite childish in some expected ways and through some unexpected avenues. The first trait that comes to mind is her diet. May has trouble keeping food down, and she only ever talks about junk food, is seen eating takeout, or something along those lines. This can be observed, but it can be felt through a hangout opportunity with their friend B. You head out grocery shopping with her and she lets you choose the ingredients for her and her father's dinner. After selecting a couple of items, you go to B's house and enjoy a hearty dinner. Boy, if only that were the case. Most likely, May will choose a poor selection of foods that don't go with each other. B and her father will self-deprecatingly talk themselves into ordering takeout or opting for something else. Now, you might say, hey, this is a reflection of the player's choices, so wouldn't it be your childish antics that caused this? And to that I say sure, maybe I did select poor choices. It's not like I play video games so I can eat a well-balanced meal. What else do you want me to do? Your taxes? Perhaps some laundry? Come on man, I'm here to be an angsty teen, not a responsible adult. When you do choose ingredients that pair well with each other, you'll get the achievement accidentally good dinner. With the subtext, let's not pretend it was skill. It could be meta commentary that the devs know who this game is catering to, but it's also implying that May shouldn't have even known what would make a balanced meal for the palate. This emphasizes her childishness despite having been off to college all on her own. Another aspect where May seems reluctant to grow up in is her rebellious nature. Sure, we have all sorts of people like that, but usually they will be fighting for civil rights and such in an organized manner. Much like a troubled middle schooler with an F in geography, May rebels against the law and commits petty crimes, such as shoplifting from the in-universe Hot Topic in the canonically accurate abandoned mall. If you decide to hang out with Greg, you engage with these petty crimes a ton. During one interaction, you break a bunch of bulbs that Greg's boss has in storage. Greg hysterically cackles as he throws them up to you, and with a swing of a bat, you shatter them with grace. It's obvious that May has practice with these tools and activities, reinforced by a dream where she is destroying lampposts and other structures with a bat as well. There's a plethora of other nitpicks we could pick out to describe May's childishness. It's written in her embarrassment, her tendency to revolt, and inability to confront difficulties. During one night when May is hanging out with Greg and his boyfriend Angus, the couple brings up the topic of their desire to leave their hometown. As the only gay people in this community, they feel the need to escape. In a nation where their very being is seen as DEI, a negatively connotated subject among half the country, then we could imagine how isolated they must be. Greg and Angus have been working their butts off, saving up whatever they can and playing it by the rulebook when it comes to their plan to leave. In an upfront conversation, Greg asks May if she can let him grow up. He wants to put the days of knife fights and electrocution therapy behind them, and live the only way he knows how, cherishing Angus and securing a future for them. It's a very touching moment, but it obviously tells of a childishness that May still has in her. Greg associates her with these antics, and with how readily May accepted the hangouts, it could be said that she still finds joy in going to the woods and f***ing stuff up. In a situation like this, you would think that May only has the choice to go forward with what they say, and for the most part, she does. There is a glaring topic we've been avoiding, and it is the reason why May is visiting her hometown. In essence, she is dropping out of college. Be it a lack of friends or her distaste for academics and schooling, there's one major issue that she can't look past. Her neurodivergence, or in other words, mental illness, is something that she struggles with to this day. Within the story of Night in the Woods, you discover that May suffers from dissociation. She rambles on about the specifics of the experience where it stemmed from, but let me put into perspective the most important part of all this. From personal experience, I can tell you that some of these thought patterns appear all of a sudden. Like a switch being flipped, the harmful aspects of mental illness pollute your mind in a cascade. It envelops you, and there isn't room for bargaining or negotiations. The worst parts of you are dragged out into the light. It's how May became known as a killer, for her dissociation caused a very physical incident to occur. Her parents had to pay for her treatment, which came from a regular doctor, not a specialized therapist or psychiatrist, in the form of a journal. Throughout your playthrough, May scribbles down thoughts and drawings into a journal that you can look through. Sometimes the images are cute, but others can be self-deprecating attacks on her own character. This illness is the reason why May couldn't survive in college. Her atypical mind couldn't take on an entirely new environment, one that was wholly foreign from her hometown. Everything would mesh together into an incomprehensible glob of confusion, anxiety, and anger. We know that May suffers from these things. There's a lot riding on her branching out, but her aversion to growing up is preventing her from spreading out. It could be a byproduct of the illness, or it could be adding on to the already infested blight that dissociation is. But I believe May suffers from a certain condition, atypical apathy. Like many things, symptoms like these operate on a spectrum. Yeah, I may like mentally deranged women more, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't also sometimes want a big burly man to rely on. It's that kind of spectrum. This condition, atypical apathy, refers to the loss of interest in the surrounding environment and other topics. Obviously, May doesn't have a distaste for life as a whole, because one thing she can appreciate are her friends, delinquent activities, and astronomy, which, I didn't quite expect from someone who doesn't even know what the word endorphins is. What May does have a disinterest for is her future. Any education she can receive or jobs she could take up are sitting on the back burner right now. She would rather catch up with friends, check out an abandoned mall, hang out by the train tracks, and sort of just live in the moment. I think that a great reflection of neurodivergence is being painfully aware of what'll heal you. And for May, it's living in the moment right now. When it comes to her hometown, May's dissociation takes a backseat as well. It's an environment that is familiar to her. She feels comfortable in the abandoned buildings, the perhaps musky diner, and the backwoods that hold malicious intent. If I had lived somewhere in the countryside like this, I would be permanently afraid of some monstrosity devouring me from the shadows. But that's just my schizophrenia talking. There's a benefit to May's aversion to growing up, or rather, a reason to stay put rather than diving into unknown waters. It's not as simple as an immaturity or negligence to responsibility. We see B and May struggling to see eye to eye on this throughout the game. This boils down to brain chemistry, a mixture of atypical reactions in neurons that produce neurodivergent behaviors and conditions. We aren't even close to understanding these limitations that are placed upon us. The best we can do is support the symptoms that arrive. That's what mental health services are for. But as you can see in May's case, they didn't have the best tools to tackle dealing with this atypical behavior. Her neurodivergence is misunderstood and by some, not acknowledged. By others, it is recognized as a weakness when it's something we're born with, just as I would have brown eyes and you may have heterochromia. It's just part of us. Night in the Woods has a beautiful representation of mental health in states that have underrepresentation of epidemics that are taking place. Mental illness is a huge part of the world, as stated by the World Health Organization. We should place more safety nets in place now that we have the systems to diagnose these problems. However, much as we learn about in this story as well, capitalism and social constructs have a different narrative. So yeah, I get it. Can't go for one video essay without the YouTuber mentioning capitalism in some sort of cynical sense. It's kind of a staple for commentary about social issues to talk about the system we're forced to integrate into. But it's warranted. We're born into this society and blah blah blah, the rich man wins and everyone else loses. This much we already know. I want to show the little snippets of this idea we see in Night in the Woods. The first instance I want to mention is the original incident of May's dissociation. Specificities of the assault don't matter, but the aftermath does in this context. Once her parents figured out what the problem was, they needed help getting the treatment that May needed. In order to do this, they went through some financial trouble. It's not like they had the best support either, as we discussed earlier, and there being no psychological doctors and instead just a general pediatrician. The best they can do, with no access to medication or training in therapy, is to give May a journal where she has an outlet for her thoughts. This is actually a good method of coping, but it shouldn't serve as the entire treatment. Knowing nothing better, May's parents still had to pay a grand amount in order to get this ragtag sort of procedure. These facts aren't told to us straight out, but we can assume this is the case, and the timeline isn't exactly clear in my mind, but her family had trouble obtaining the house that they live in. Whether it was before the treatment acquisition or after doesn't matter, as both still depict signs of financial trouble, as the payment plan they went with was not meant for those who could afford the house, it was meant for the needy who needed a chance. If you don't see a problem with this, then we might as well be Universal healthcare is a huge controversial political issue in the United States for reasons that only apply to the rich and their loss on profit. It's a business rather than a right in this country, so you can only imagine how those two ideologies grate against each other as people in an emergency can't afford an ambulance. The second instance of capitalistic ideology that hurts the world, and frankly, those dealing with dooming thoughts, is the case of Bruce outside of the church. Bruce is a homeless man who had a difficult alcohol-induced assault problem back at home, and decided to run away and leave his life behind. This is when he reached Possum Springs and decided to camp out on the hill by the town church. Problems would have stopped there and festered, but the pastor wanted to help Bruce, so she sought counseling and assistance from the city council. Long deliberation, day after day. Thinking for hours came from the pastor. I wouldn't say as much from the city council. They always question the pastor, wondering why they should give a person free housing or any accommodations at all. You can obviously see this on a major scale in places like Los Angeles and New York. We can get into these politics, but I won't because I'm not here to solve the housing and homeless crisis. We're here to judge your average Jeff Bezos enjoyer. The city council ultimately decides not to push for the accommodations that Bruce shall receive, and it is a unanimous decision. They say, go f yourself, I'm gonna head on home and devour a 4-pound ribeye. The decision itself is a problem, but the root cause are the drivers that are pushing the motives. Throughout the whole time you're walking around town, when you come in contact with the council, they are discussing and debating how to put their town on the map. They want to be recognized by the state to gain more funding and boost their business, ultimately gaining affirmation from capitalist society. This grand scheme, in order to commercialize their city, is the whole reason why they can't provide one homeless man accommodations for basic living. Talk about greedy and inhumane. Thankfully, Bruce decides to go back home. However, we can still acknowledge how basic human rights are commodified. Food, water, shelter are basic needs that everyone should have. If you found that political, then oh man, I can't wait to hear you say some dumb like a house is an investment. No matter. We've made the point clear that capitalist society isn't tailored to work for the average person, only the fortunate ones who are able to get rich. It isn't meant to favor those who work minimum wage jobs like Angus and Greg, and instead keeps them encased in the house of oppression. There is no equal opportunity for them. B wants to go to university, but she needs to uphold her father after her mother passed away. We could say that the inability to treat her mother's cancer was the fault of the healthcare system. B seems to have a disdain for opportunity, responsibility, and the fault of society's accommodations for those who fall on hard times. Despite wanting more for herself and perhaps her family, she has to work paycheck to paycheck to afford food, an apartment, and a car to have a break from non-stop work at least once a month. May is also in this boat. Healthcare in Possum Springs isn't meant to cater to those who are mentally ill. Neurodivergence is an issue that isn't thought about within their populace. That is why there is no specialized professional to deal with those ordeals. She has to suffer from a condition that can get no concrete help from anyone in her town. Capitalism isn't tailored towards those who are atypical, or in other words, neurodivergent, for those who will go unspoken. A large portion of the game's ending is centered around capitalism's faults for providing for the common man. People lose hope and cower in fear. It forces people like May to fall into a nihilistic viewpoint. There's a bright side to nihilism, but May has a very strong quote from this game. She says, "And I want it to hurt, because that means it meant something. It means I am something, at least." There's multiple theories for what this speech entailed, but in my eyes, it talks of the burden that neurodivergence can be. May feels as though she has lost her way long ago. She doesn't like school, doesn't like the outside world. Her aversion to growing up is trying to protect her from the disappointing revelation that she has no future. She has no prospects. Her fear of failure is ever present, and it becomes addicting to ruminate on with her atypical mind, constantly throwing jabs at her ego for just being herself. Again, Capitalist society isn't made for neurodivergent people. There is no issue with neurodivergence. The burden of it stems from the faults of the system we are raised in. I think that's why there's so much movement for social issues. Many people feel failed because they're different, not typical, not the shining standard that the forefathers talked about in the Constitution, the white man who has something to his name. This isn't meant to be an attack on anyone. I guess the whole message of this video is to be aware of your privilege, be aware of your constraints, appeal to one another, and help each other to achieve something more outside of these limitations. Despite our system, you should live to actualize the idealized version for yourself and your demographic. Nothing's wrong with being neurodivergent. We just have to be stronger together. Hey, thanks a lot for watching this video. It started as a comedic video and it was that up to a point. But Night in the Woods is a story that deserves more than just one-liners and witty quips. If you enjoyed this sort of content and want more, like the video so that I know to make more of it. Subscribe if you want to keep up with all of my videos. Let me know about any other game recommendations in the comments, and I'll see you later, you cool people.